I understand that we have over 500 participants on this summit today, so it's going to be quite interactional, and we can't wait to hear from the wisdom that we have speaking to us today. Without further ado, I'm just going to take you through what to expect for the day, the order of the day, and then I will introduce our keynote speakers as they come along. Firstly, we're going to hear a very short welcome from our ABSIP president, Mepulo Liteka Khadebe, and then she will be preceded by a keynote address from Ms. Priscilla Mabalani and a keynote address from Dr. Phumzile Lamong. Then at 12 o'clock, hopefully we'll be on time. We will have our panel discussions, which will be headed by or facilitated by Delphine Gavender. This is a jam-packed session, ladies and gentlemen, so please just mind us in terms of time, and we'll be limited to taking those questions as they come along. So what we suggest is that Ms. Mabalani will take the Q&A in the panel discussion later on if we run over time. And because Dr. Phumzile Mlamongcuka has to leave us after her keynote address, we'll just gracefully ask her to allow just one or two questions from our audience, just so that we can engage with her more. So let's kick off, and please allow me to introduce Ms. Priscilla Mabalani. I'm just going to go through her profile. I'm sure we know of her lengthy experience, but let me just refresh your memory. Ms. Priscilla Mabalani is the outgoing CEO of BP South Africa and BP Southern Africa, which includes Mozambique operations. She assumed these roles in 2017. She leaves BP now after 9 years of experience to pursue other exciting opportunities. Priscilla joined BP in 2011 as the Chief Financial Officer in Southern Africa before relocating to London as the Retail Operations Director for the UK retail business in 2015. In this role, Priscilla was responsible for the development and implementation of the retail strategy in the UK, comprising of 1,200 retail sites, and she was responsible for driving operation excellence also in Europe. Her career credentials include holding various executive roles in various large South African companies. In these includes airport companies, where she was the CFO, Ernst & Young, where she was the tax director, Eskom, where she held various finance and tax general management roles. Priscilla also served on the South African Petroleum Industry Association. She's on the board committee there, and she's the chairperson, having been appointed in 2018. She's also a non-executive director for Vodacom, and she was actually non-executive director of Vodacom and Standard Bank, and she's also a member of the Institute of Financial Accountants. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to give a warm welcome to the powerhouse that is Ms. Priscilla Mabalani.
Thank you, Disebo, and ladies and gentlemen, good day. Such a privilege and honor to have been granted an opportunity to come and address you today. I would have loved to have this face-to-face so I can get to meet you and network. I do hope that such an opportunity will avail itself in the near future. I think first of all, it's important that I recognize that we are meeting at a time when our lives have been disrupted significantly, and we all have a lot of anxieties in our minds in terms of caregiving, how we balance our careers. At the same time, we have seen rapid and fundamental changes in businesses as we all striving to respond to the challenges that we are faced with in order to sustain the financial health of our people and our businesses. So with that, I also would like to recognize that in every challenge, there are huge opportunities. And it's also important today as we reflect in terms of our role as women, and we celebrate the Women Month, and we also celebrate those who have come before us and those who continue to strive for all of us to get better opportunities. But equally so, not forgetting the young girls and mothers that are subjected to gender violence, which we've also seen strengthening or increasing significantly, unfortunately so, in the last couple of months in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So with that, as we then recognize the opportunities that will also, or that are actually being afforded to us through this challenge, and I'll mention some of those, we also need to think hard about our role as mothers, as leaders, as individuals in society. How do we then contribute to make South Africa, our continent, and our world a better place for all? I firmly believe that in every challenge, there are opportunities. And as we're dealing with the anxieties, we need to build the resilience. But that resilience needs to also afford us an opportunity to look much more broadly and to broaden our horizon. The world is indeed changing, but the opportunities are also significant. We've seen our lives being disrupted with technology. On the other hand, it's been an exceptional enabler as we adapt technological solutions for us to be able to work from home. Equally, we've seen society as well as consumer behaviors changing rapidly. Their drive for digital solutions, for convenience, has become even more prominent now during this pandemic. Companies are also starting to adapt rapidly and accelerate technology, particularly in terms of looking for efficiencies, while also looking for platforms that will create new business models going forward. So all of these changes at times create opportunities. And I do believe that equally, the leadership attributes that are required for the future is going to be quite different to what we've seen in the past. We've seen the importance of empathy, care, visible leadership in the last couple of months. That's going to be quite important. And as a mother and as a woman, I found that to be one of my natural instincts. So I do hope that as you think about what the future holds for us, and you also think about how you're going to grow and continue to be a better person, to be able to become a better exemplar for those who come after us. So with that, I've been asked to share my journey, and I hope you can take some few lessons from what I have to enjoy. I've had a fantastic career, most of it sponsored, supported, and I'll share some of the attributes that I believe have actually made me a better person. So maybe as a start, most of you probably got to know me better after I was appointed the CEO of BP Southern Africa, which I know the headlines, which were referred to as the first woman in South Africa to head a multinational company. A qualifier which so frequently accompanies my name. On the other hand, my personal view is that while it's great to be celebrated, to be recognized, and for everyone to celebrate my accomplishments, I'm still extremely disappointed that in 2020, with some women who are capable of running companies and doing better in different roles, that we still celebrate individuals. The reality is that I'm not different. Just to share my story before I get into some of the attributes and learnings. I'm one of those who generally should not have made it if we go into the societal norms. I started my first learning in a classroom mat. At times, I've studied under a tree. And I had a privilege of a chalkboard falling and hurting my leg. I still carry that deep scar to remind me of the possibilities of the future. So as such, I do believe that we all need to ensure that we level the playing fields for every one of us. For that Priscilla, who grew up in a village, in a dusty village, who never thought that at some stage she could occupy the most complex boardrooms and be able to dialogue with the greatest minds, that it is all possible. But yet we do recognize that it is a journey, and here's my story. Some few things that I've learned along the way. The first part was around the clarity of vision. I think it's very, very important for all of us that we actually have clarity of where we are going, so that every step we take in our careers is building towards that long-term goal. But equally so, we need to be able to understand that circumstances will change. I think change is inevitable. We've seen it with the current climate. And how do you then adapt while also ensuring that you deepen and you anchor your career? I've always known at a very early age that I wanted to be a chartered accountant because it sounded sexy. I liked it. Did not know anyone, but it was something that every time I used the word, it resonated with me. Then I researched, I worked harder to understand what it would take for me to achieve that goal. After achieving the goal, I then had to make sure that I got to university and I passed. And after my matric, and I did that. But that is not enough, because that's really just the foundation of where you're going as an individual. The education paves a way and opens a door for you. What really matters is how you deepen your expertise and you really ensure that you can be trusted, respected as a thought leader. And that requires self-discipline, investment in one's career, and a lot of hard work. So as such, I decided to use my profession with the focus on the CFO roles as stepping stones and pillars to deepen my strategic and business experiences, and also to develop broader leadership skills. This was quite important. And every role I applied for was not about the title, it's about the content of the role. How do I afford myself an opportunity to grow and to learn? I know that in a climate where at times companies don't invest significantly in their own, continue to go out looking for female to occupy executive seats, that we get tempted with a number of opportunities and offers. I always encourage young people I mentor and coach to really look deeper in every opportunity and every role they go into in terms of how it fulfills their vision and how it will make them a better person before they get tempted with the package that it offers. So I'll encourage you to do the same as you look at the opportunity that we are faced with in terms of all of the digital, the technological changes that are coming our way. You have to really set your own vision, be clear around how you're going to get there, be honest about your capabilities and what you need to do to ensure that you can be distinctive. I also use this vision to build solid networks over time. And this has actually helped me during my career to be able to leverage on those networks and to also learn from others. But also importantly, I also sought sponsorships in every company that I worked for. And because of my exceptional contribution, this was an easy job. And I've been really blessed to have been supported predominantly by male, because I've operated in male-dominated worlds. And they've really taken keen interest in my career. They've helped me shape it. And they've also challenged me. And I've embraced that opportunity as I knew I was becoming better every day. So that's the first part of my first learning that I just had to share with you. And nothing along the way, the obstacles that I've gone across have ever stopped me or will ever deter me from achieving that vision. So the second learning is what I call purposeful living. I firmly believe that we are in this world to make a contribution towards others beyond our own self-interest. And as such, with the privileges that I've had, particularly in terms of the roles that I've occupied, I've really used those opportunities, and I continue to challenge myself to use those opportunities to transform and create conducive environment for others. And I do this openly and apologetically. I never let the box that I hold to define who I am. However, I take advantage of it. I use the box as a means to drive change beyond measure. And this is difficult, at times challenging. It takes courage, it takes hard work, it takes dedication, particularly when you're operating in a dynamic environment where shareholders are breathing on your neck on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, for performance and for delivery. So how you spend your time, how you allocate your time in achieving your broader goal, further to supporting and contributing beyond measure to the companies you work for, becomes quite important. So what has been driving me is that I don't feel comfortable being an exception in a room. I actually get that chronic uneasiness when I get into a room and it's full of men or full of white people with hardly any Black people. So an example closer to you, which I usually challenge, and my team knows me, that I spend a lot of time looking at all of the barriers in my organization, spending time with the talent, understanding the barriers that are getting in the way, understanding why is it that we have this fantastic, young, energetic women coming from university with exceptional degrees, and for some reason, in our own organizations, they go through a funnel. So how do we break that? What is our role? How do we make sure that when we are appointing people on meritocracy, that the panel, as well as the pool of candidates, is representative, that we remove the biases that we all hold as individuals? So as such, I usually joke when I talk to some people in your industry around my experiences with bankers as well as financial advisors. And more often, I've had various meetings where a couple of your colleagues, predominantly male, and I really don't know why most of the time they're about 10 and 12 in a room, will come and visit me or come to share or even do work for us. And if I'm very lucky, I'll have two women. One could be a relationship manager or something else. But fundamentally, the experts, the people who will be speaking, who will be leading the conversations, will be predominantly men. Then I ask myself, what went through their minds, knowing very well that they're going to meet a female executive? And yet, they don't question themselves as they were preparing, not about the content of what they're going to share with me, but most importantly, whether they are fairly representative. So those are the things that I found challenging. And yes, I do use those opportunities to challenge a number of them. And more often than not, I get disappointed in some of the responses. But yet, I continue to challenge, because it's only through those few seeds that we plant that eventually the dots will connect. So as such, as I was preparing for this session, I was also then reminded and came across the 2008 PwC report, which I've read before, which is called The Leaking Pipeline. Where are female leaders? In which an analogy of a leaking water pipeline is used to reflect the situation in which many organizations find themselves with the continuing loss of female talent for various reasons. And I spoke about some of those barriers. And yet, 11 years later, that pipe is still leaking. And the fact is, this leak will not fix itself. We all need to roll up our sleeves and get down and fix it. And this, for me, is what I call a purposeful leadership. So as you look at the opportunities that the future holds for you, just think about how you're going to use that to achieve a better purpose than yourself. For me, my career has been really fulfilling, particularly the simple acts of kindness. My passion to drive change and develop others has really been rewarding and has also inspired others to play a better role. And I've really enjoyed seeing that happening around me. And in the last couple of months, I've been going through some emotional transition, going into an exciting organization, but on the other hand, leaving an exceptional team behind. And the overwhelming messages that I've received locally and globally from my colleagues, the tears that I had to share with my colleagues and teams has been fundamental. And that just showed me how privileged I am to have touched people's lives in the way that I've never ever imagined. And I'm grateful that I had opportunity to enjoy that while I was still living, than being referred to as a first woman who did that. So that is more fulfilling for me. A third lesson that I've learned, which I've touched on in the beginning in terms of your vision, it's also around value proposition. So to challenge the status quo and to have clarity of purpose takes courage. But I also believe that unless people trust and have confidence in you, and they're willing to do trade-offs so that you can achieve your ambitions, it will be difficult to maximize that value. So as such, you really have to be clear on what your value proposition is, but also understand that as women, we are operating in a highly competitive environment, locally, globally, and yet most of the time, whether we like it or not, we are at the bottom of the pyramid. So how do we continuously ensure that our distinctive value proposition is well understood and that we are poised to succeed and to be competitive? And that, again, is underpinned by the investment you make in yourself. I've mentioned some of those in terms of deepening your experiences. Your values play an important role, and I'll come back to that at a later stage. But most importantly, understanding that we are not individuals, we are teams, and we operate in communities and in teams. And it's important to uphold the value of humility and good team play. As a leader, I've had the misfortunate of having to part with highly capable individuals whose behaviors I could not tolerate. So gone are the days where we focus our effort only on the what. Emphasis is also on the how, because that's what builds sustainable legacies. So my experiences at Ernst & Young at a very early age of my career have really helped me to really shape my value proposition. But what was more encouraging for me as well was that remarkable contribution did not only create the notable networks and sponsorships but also gave the company the confidence to open up opportunities for other young African Black talent that came after me. Just not easy being the first in a small office in Maritzburg and to have to deal with the biases, but I really had fun. And I'm glad that I've seen a lot of young, talented women, African, Indian, colored, becoming chartered accountants over the years. And equally so, as they've indicated in my bio, I spent some time in the UK. And this was one of the privileges that I had. And I was given an opportunity to manage our UK operations. And this is one of our flagship, actually the only flagship retail business in BP globally. And everyone globally aspire to have such an opportunity. And I was granted this opportunity again because of the confidence that my superiors had in me and the ability to take risk on me as well. So it's very, very important as I conclude to understand that as we look at the opportunities and how we're going to repurpose ourselves, how we're going to reinvent and learn and relearn as we start thinking about machine learnings, their roles in our lives, as we think about our leadership attributes going forward, that we also importantly understand that we really have to be distinctive and be able to offer those who want to take a risk in us a better value proposition than others. The one that I also want to spend a bit of time on, be mindful of time as well, I need to conclude, is around growth. And in terms of thirst for growth, I have learned that the only way to do that most of the time is the vulnerability to learn through failure, but also the vulnerability to open yourself to learn from others. And as an individual, I've encountered multiple setbacks, and I've learned through those experiences that I should not see them as deterrents, but as opportunities for growth. And some of these are simple failures because of naivety when I was at university after getting my degree with cum laude. My arrogance at certain subjects were not exciting for me. And when I was doing my postgraduate, I failed management accounting. I wasted the entire year. Even though I passed my board exam first time on first attempt. And I look back and I wondered what really happened. Of all the difficult subjects I've ever done, I had to fail the most simple subject. And that because my mindset and passion was not there. So I think it's also important as you afford yourself opportunity for growth and you look at your attitude and your mindset. And this is also important as I transitioned into senior roles and making sure that the successes that I have enjoyed don't come in the way, create arrogance, create stumbling blocks for me to know that I don't know it all. And most of the time, I have to depend and rely on others to become a better person. It has taken a number of learnings and reflections and different lenses of others to enable me to see through some of those blind spots that invariably as a human being, you accumulate over time. So I really challenge all of us to understand that most of the time, our strengths are usually our blind spots. So how do we afford ourselves an opportunity to see ourselves with the lens of others? How do we encourage ourselves to be more vulnerable, have the courage to listen to the feedback and to sort it even when it's not there? We're all human beings. We all continuously look for an opportunity to be recognized. But equally so, it's important that we strive the right ratio critique, and recognition, because then you can sharpen and you can continue to grow. I also learned that you have to learn horizontally and vertically. And this again is very important as you get to senior executive roles, because people find it challenging to really challenge you as an individual. And it's not because you're an individual, they respect you. Most of the time, it's because they respect your box. So it becomes fundamentally important that you're visible, you go to the experts in your organization, you're vulnerable, you understand what you don't know, you learn from them, you encourage open dialogues and debates, in addition to external and other learnings that you might take. And you have the humility to ask basic questions and admit when you don't know, and also admit when you make mistakes. And also reflect on a daily basis. I do that every day. What could I have done better? And this is even more important when you think you're successful. So people often ask me, how did I manage to pivot into such a technical industry, male-dominated, worked globally, and very highly competitive as well? My response most of the time is because I had a little help from everyone. And this is true. And I also make sure that I don't measure success in the moment, as the craving for success can be destructive. And I use every path to learn, to listen, and to challenge my conventional thinking. So for that, I'll forever be indebted and grateful for the men and women who have given an opportunity to lead them in the past, and those who will be leading me, and those who I'll be leading in the future, and who have been receptive to my challenge and have also been my reservoir for growth. So before I conclude, I mentioned earlier on around staying grounded on 3 values, which is my last learning. So as you take all of this learning in terms of whether it's how do you set your vision, whether it's around how do you then go back and look at your purpose, your value proposition, you also need to be thinking about your values. I only work for companies where their values and mine are aligned. And one of the things that really saddens and deepens me, and which is one of the deepest thing that has impacted me during the COVID pandemic, is when you open the papers and you see the amount of news around how funds, which were limited funds, that were put aside to support, preserve life, and support those who are not fortunate as us, has been misused. So I really hope that as society, as individuals, we will really ask ourselves deeply and use this environment to reflect on who we are, what are our values, how are we going to ensure that we live those values on a daily basis, that our boundaries are clear, that our colleagues, our friends, our families understand our lenses and understand when we will be able to adapt and when we will not, when we will be able to yield and when we will not. Our country and our future kids requires better leaders and a better legacy. And at minimum, if we're not concerned about it for ourselves, we owe it to them. So I really would like to encourage all of you to really think hard about your values and what you stand for as individuals. And with that, I've also been able to leverage on my upbringing as a Christian that has given me very, very solid foundation. And also my family has been my source of sanity. And for that, I'm also grateful for their continued love and challenge. So in closing, we are operating in an extremely challenging environment, in an extremely challenging world, yet full of opportunities. The socioeconomic impact and gaps will continue to widen as companies and society is responding to the economic impact of the pandemic. Our roles and responsibilities is to really step up, embrace that change, be innovative, really think of how we're going to lead the changes, the transition, and how we're going to be exemplars in society, not only in terms of achieving our own personal goals, but in terms of creating better legacies for others. So with that, please pause and reflect. And I usually say to my team, everyone is capable. It is all about our will. And I thank you.
Wow. What can we say after that presentation and those valuable words? We took so much from your insights as a keynote speaker, Priscilla. What we've taken notes. I certainly have, and I hope the audience has. How to operate in a male-dominated industry and the challenge that comes with that. How to spend your time and challenge your goals. And we will then see to implement those in our workplace. And I'd just like, before we go to the next keynote address, to just say hello and welcome our guests today. I know that your videos are off now, just so that we can just introduce you, acknowledge your presence, and welcome you for today's session. Just a quick one. If you can just do that for us. Delphine, thank you. So Delphine is with our, she's going to be facilitating our panel later on. And Derek as well will be in the panel as our guest. Thank you, welcome. And is there anyone else that, there we go. Puti will also be in the panel a bit later, giving her insight as well. All right, so now that we have gone through the keynote address, we will discuss some of the questions I see in the Q&A session. There are questions that are drawn towards Priscilla. We will tackle those in the panel discussion that's going to come a bit later, so that we just get through our keynote speakers, just to be aware of our time. I'm going to, the time is 11:42, and I'm going to welcome Dr. Phumzile Mlamong, who's going to give our next keynote address. Dr. Mlamong, I'm just going to go through your bio real quickly, and then I'll hand over to you. Dr. Lamong is the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. Now in her second term, she began her career as a leader in South Africa and an activist in the struggle against apartheid. She was part of the women's movement that organized for women's rights and ensuring that we are protected in the new constitution and free South Africa. She has become a member of parliament and deputy minister under the Mandela government, and she was appointed Minister of Minerals and Energy and subsequently Deputy President, working to fight against HIV and AIDS and coordinating efforts between private sector, civil society, and government to tackle poverty and education issues. As head of the UN entity, she's dedicated towards gender equality and empowerment of women. She is a global advocate and influencer. In 2018 and 19, she was named one of the most influential persons in gender policy around the world. I'm going to repeat that for my millennials, that she is quite an influencer. We have an influencer amongst us. She has been the most influential persons in gender policy around the world. And she's a member of the G7 Gender Advisory Council. Under her leadership, the panel of women's economic empowerment convened in 2015 and highlighted key issues and actions, including overrepresentation of women in the informal sector, unpaid care, harmful gender norms, and stereotypes that constrain progress. She has led organizations' innovative work on disruptions on societal norms. For example, we're talking about the he for she movement that focused on male engagements in gender equality. And we're also talking about the Unstereotype Alliances Initiative. In 2019, the advertising industry recognized her for her efforts in this regard and for her advocacy for women, for human rights, social justice throughout the world with the prestigious Lionheart Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka has been a driving role of women in leadership and ending discrimination and violence against women and girls. She holds a PhD in education and technology from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. I'd like to give a warm welcome to the inspirational and our hero, as we know it, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla and Lesebo. Thank you so much, Priscilla, for sharing your journey with us so generously. And I would also like to say Happy Women's Day to everybody. Happy Women's Day to both men and women, especially to men who mother, and of course to women, because this is indeed their month, but it's bittersweet because we also have a lot to be concerned about as far as women is concerned. I know that you are very short for time, so I'll try to be very quick. And I also want to apologize that I probably would leave before we end, even though I would have wanted to hear most of the speakers, because in my business, I tend to talk a lot with people who work on qualitative rather than quantitative issues. And sometimes we lose a perspective of how much we are missing the point or how much we are making the point. And when we talk to people who know how to count, it is usually very sobering, but I hopefully, Paulo, you'll make sure I get the tape. Also, I would want to just to say to you, please keep the women and people in Mali in your mind. They've just had a coup, which is why I also have to run. It is quite difficult for women and girls to try and maneuver in that situation right now. We are in a global pandemic, and every pandemic has a gender dimension. So COVID-19 is also not gender neutral, and usually the gender context of pandemics, especially health pandemics, is not so much how the disease impacts on women or how many women die from the disease. It's usually how the disease is handled in the response that affects women. What are the underlying inequalities that become exaggerated in a crisis of that nature? Access to infrastructure, as well as resources needed to survive a pandemic, access to power and policy making, lack of saving insurance, the informality of their business and the precarious contracts that they usually have, the lack of spokespersons who represent a gender perspective in decision making, where decisions are being made about what is to be done about a crisis, which usually alters sometimes the trajectory of the country. And I think right now, we also have an illusion of a generous supply of women in leadership. We are a minority as women leaders. In the world, all over, women are just not many enough in decision making, and therefore we have to do the jobs of 5 women, but more than anything else, we have to make sure that those 5 women make it into the places where they can make women. So it is a complex situation. In this pandemic, one of the gender dimension of this pandemic is the shadow pandemic of violence against women, which was there before Corona, will continue to exist after Corona, but has to be fought the hardest way possible during Corona, because in times of crisis, there is sometimes an opportunity to bring about changes that are harder to bring in when things are relatively normal. So on gender-based violence, we have an opportunity to demand essential services on prevention, on response, on dealing with the criminal justice system, both during the crisis, but also for the long haul, so that we don't just concentrate on flattening the curve of Corona, but also the curve of gender-based violence, because violence against women is the most dehumanizing form of discrimination against women that we see everywhere in the world. So we have to make sure whatever else we are fighting, we do something about fighting this particular type of discrimination. Corona is a health crisis, and therefore it's important for us also to not take our eyes off the ball from the health issues. As I was asked to highlight women's leadership in this context, women are caregivers. So because this is the health crisis, women are very much engaged, because health is about caregiving at home and within the health institution. At home, women do a lot of the unpaid care work, also of looking after people who cannot get to go to medical institution because of the moment. They then become the de facto person who play a part to absorb the cost of the health system. And that is a continuation of their unpaid care work that is provided in most situations by women and girls. But also women dominate the health sector in the formal sense. 85% of nurses are women. Women are also, they cooks, they clean, and women are, however, a minority of those who lead in the health sector. And that is something that needs to change, because the insights they have from the work that they do in the work is critical when decisions are being made. Women also have been the majority of the health workers who have died during the pandemic. And in Italy, for instance, about 2/3 of the health workers who have died during Corona were women. So it would not be an exaggeration to say that women have shouldered this pandemic and have been the one who have given most to society in order to make all of us safe. I don't think that we've given women enough of the gratitude that they deserve, together obviously with the male colleagues who have also sacrificed and continue to sacrifice their lives. But it is important for us to keep on highlighting how much the women have provided a critical service at this time. for every 3 men who speak about corona in the world, only one will be a women expert, notwithstanding that the men would have gathered the facts from the women. And I think when Priscilla was talking about the people she interacts with in her work, and the scarcity of women, in some cases, you'd find that the men that she meets are able to present whatever they present to her because women have been able to put the information together. Also, the unequal pay that we see, women are in the majority in the health sector of those who are underpaid. And in many countries, we have received reports that many women have been infected in public transport while they commute from home, because most of them cannot afford private transport and have not been afforded private transports by their employers, and that too has created a particular crisis for women. But we obviously don't want to not appreciate the fact that women have a responsibility, like everyone in society, to come in when there is a crisis. And this is what they have done. And this is what we also want to thank them for. This is not only a health crisis, it is an economic crisis, it is a political a crisis, and of course, it is a leadership crisis for many countries. We have seen the few countries where women combine the political, the economic, and the leadership authority. They have been able to use all of this with great precision to focus on fighting the crisis, make decisions timelessly, be inclusive in their decision making, work with the people they don't like, whether they are in the opposition, listen to scientists and take science serious, work for a win-win, think about issues such as families, nutrition, children, and schools, all at the same time, but also take hard decisions about the economy, hard luck where hard luck of countries was needed, but also be there to deal with issues such as grief. I have been amazed at the women head of state that I have spoken to in this time, who would not finish a discussion by saying, please let us make sure we have a strategy to deal with the grief that is in the world today, because there are just too many people who have grief that we have not been able to prepare ourselves for and will need to deal with. So that rounded approach to managing a crisis of this magnitude, I think, has made women leaders in Iceland, in Germany, in New Zealand, and in Namibia, even though the woman is not a head of state, but the leader of the response in Namibia has been a woman who has done a great job, and Namibia is one of those countries that is doing well. Kerala, a big state in India, which is an equivalent of a country in our terms, in terms of the population, which is almost, if not bigger than the size of South Africa, with such a big population, their death rate has been just minimum. So we have seen that all of these women, when I've listened to them share their experiences, eyes on the ball. That for them has been very important, that they don't want to score point. This is not an opportunity for them to gain any point that was missed elsewhere. This is just an opportunity to save lives and to save their economies. Now, I just want to try and then just highlight the message about what you uniquely bring at this moment. Because of your experience, because of your skills, And I know quite a few of you in this meeting, and I know how, the passion that you bring with dealing with these issues, because in this crisis, we also must make sure that we look at the opportunities so that we do not waste a good crisis. There is a unique opportunity to build our economy better, to build our society better, because what this crisis has shown us is the inadequacy of how we have been moving forward, the inadequacies in what we have been doing as we've been moving forward. It's almost like we've been given a second chance to restart the RDP in the South Africa speak. While the problems that we dealt with during the RDP, which came from apartheid, were probably not as big as the problems that we're dealing with now, we've also lost social capital at this time because of integrity, corruption, and the other issues that unfortunately we have not been able to be to perform as we would have liked to be. So we also have to claw back and regain the trust of those people, unlike in RDP where we were starting and people were giving us a benefit of doubt. But nevertheless, we do not have a luxury not to try to build back better again. So we have to be concerned about climate change and make sure, and for you who advise clients about choices and decisions that they make, we need to build greener economies in our world and create more jobs at the same time for young people and make sure that we save our planet. Secondly, we need to take serious the digital crisis because of the absence of infrastructure for many of the people in our world. The estimation is that probably less than 20% of our people have access to digital infrastructure and related services. And in that way, we will not be able to close the inequality gap. So let us look at how we advise those who can make these decisions in the private and public sector, which has to work together in order to make sure that we fast track the access to these services for most of our children. And of course, also the workforce that we have to prepare for the new kind of work which now will exist going forward. Because if you cannot work digitally and your work only depends on you going back to work, you have a huge disadvantage. So we have to prepare our people for a new type of work while also understanding that we are going to need blended learning, which is both digital and non-digital work. And then, of course, the conditions of service of most of our people. We have exposed through coronavirus how unequal the conditions of service of our people are, and it doesn't have to be like that. I think many of you see the books in the treasuries of many companies. You see how women are underpaid, how there's unequal play, and if you have to advise them, you see there is no plan to change this. I put it to you that it is your responsibility to speak at times like this, to be whistleblowers, to say you cannot go on like this, because women are actually needed to make our functions, to make our society function much better. So we need you to be the whistleblowers and the ones who do the hard labor and the pushing in order to make sure you change those decision makers who continue to underpay, undervalue, and give conditions of services and remuneration that is unacceptable to women and girls. We also need you to fight for women's leadership and representation. I mean, we are now past the era of the 30%, 50% and parity. That is what we are talking about. We need to see a really clear roadmap for where we are going with it. Because for me, probably the issue of leadership and adequate representation is the biggest and the fastest way we're going to address many of the issues, because we need as many women inside the room. Once they're inside the room, the fact that they are not even there is probably the biggest crisis. So I think we've reached a point, and I think Priscilla tried to address that it is disheartening when people say you are one off, you are first off. We are long past that. We need to be talking about numbers of women of all ages and diversity being in the decision making. So please help us to make the companies understand that it is not good governance to be exclusive, to have white males coming to speak to us about our issues, about our needs, about decisions that affect our lives. And inclusion and diversity is nothing if it does not include power and responsibility. It cannot just be inclusion and diversity just for window dressing, and then people give you the most boring and the most uninfluential job, which has a title that brings you to the boardroom to say nothing. Inclusion and diversity has to come with power. So building back better after Corona is really each one of us in the spaces that we're in, using these opportunities to make this happen, making sure that our companies have got the policy that addresses sexual harassment, that there is action when there has been an incident, that women can trust that their board will take serious the issues of harassment, which usually happen between those who have power, who can harass those who do not have power within institutions. So yes, we have a big crisis. It is frightening, but we all have to do what we can wherever we are to make things happen. And of course, I also urge you to analyze our fiscal stimulus as South Africa. We are trying to do that all over the world with organizations of your equivalent, so that we can see that money is also going to women. The red tape does not mean that women do not benefit from the relief that is there, that the poor also do not relieve. And please let us intervene. I am asking you formally to please do this work for me, share it with me, so that in mid-September, when I have an opportunity at the General Assembly to raise that with the heads of states, not just with my head of states, who fortunately is accessible, but when you raise these things also amongst other countries, you have peer pressure, where they amongst themselves are able to talk about the inadequacy of their response and how it does not impact on women, many of whom are in the informal sector. Help us understand how much of the money that is out there will truly go to women in percentages, and how much it is going to save those who are poor. So thank you so much for the work that you do, but I'm known for not leaving people without leaving some homework, and I hope that does not mean that you don't invite me again. Thank you so much. Over.
Thank you so much for that thought-provoking address. You tackled so many issues in one piece. It's really hard to dissect which one to start with. But like you're saying, Doctor, you've given us homework, and first prize is to get those women in the table and in the seats, and therefore hold them accountable. It's still such a shame that the statistics on that is not as it should be, and we and our colleagues with ABSIP as well would like to address that and slowly support women to take more seats and take up more space. We're going to take up just one or two questions. If you do have a bit of time, please let us know we run over. And then just for our audience and our guests to engage with you a bit more, if you'd please raise your hands, and I'd like a team at the back office to just help us with the questions, if there are any. I see most questions are addressed to in the Q&A sessions to Priscilla. And I see Ndombi is there asking a question. I will just read it out. Ndombi wants to know, do you think we are ready for a female president, looking at the barriers that we're currently presented?
Yes, I think we have been ready for a female president for a long time. I think that in South Africa, we cannot say we have barriers that are insurmountable. I think ourselves as women, because we cannot make that a homework for men, I think it just takes us as women making sure that in places where we can influence decision making and choices of leaders, we speak for ourselves. We don't toe the party line and represent the agenda for patriarchy. That we go there, organize, very clear about our ask and demand, and make it happen. But also, we are the majority of the people who vote. So it is in our hands. We can organize ourselves, and we can then make that choice. So we are both ready. We have the possibility, and we need, however, to organize ourselves much better.
Very true. I understand, Mepulo, you also have a question.
Thank you so much, Disebo, and good morning or good afternoon to all the panelists and the audience. It's really more a comment than a question. Thank you so much, Me, for really a very insightful presentation. And I think, thank you as always for challenging us. You are quite correct that you are well known for always leaving people behind with a lot of homework. And I think that the issues you raise around the impact of digital technology and how it has further increased the levels of inequality cannot be overemphasized. And I think this is an area that we need to be doing a lot of work on in terms of deliberately ensuring that we upskill as many of our people as possible, because if we do not do that, we will actually reverse all the gains that we have made over the past 26 years. So I think it's quite an urgent thing, and I just wanted to share with you that ABSIP is actually launching a digital transformation series from the beginning of September, where we are going to be having a number of discussions with various stakeholders, from both the financial services sector, labor, as well as people within the ICT space, to bring our heads together and try to figure out how we respond very urgently to this growing problem. So we should hopefully be able to, as we engage with you, start sharing with you some of the initiatives on the ground and the type of impact, hopefully, that we will start seeing as a result of those skills development initiatives, or digital transformation rather initiatives. And I think the second challenge, which is a very important one, is the one around how the money that has been made available to respond to COVID, how much of it has gone to women and how much of it has gone to men. And I think anecdotal evidence already suggests that, as always, women have received very, very little of it, even though women have actually been the most impacted, negatively impacted by this this virus. So I think we take on the challenge that you have given us, and we are hoping that indeed when you present to the General Council in September, we will be able to share with you the relevant statistics around how the figures look. And thank you so much for making time to talk to us and our members. It's really much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayor. Before we let you go, I just wanted to thank you and just acknowledge that you'll be leaving a bit early. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would just also want to leave you with the knowledge that we only have 25% of the women in the world on average representing us in many decision-making fora. Whether peace is discussed, economy, politics, etc. And the goal is that in the next 5 years, 20 to 2025, we reach 40. So please shine in the corner where you are to get us to cover this 25% in the coming 5 years so that we reach parity. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so just to let you know and introduce the next, we're going to go into our panel discussion now, and our panel is going to be steered by Delphine Govender. I'll just introduce our panel and the guests that are going to be speaking, and then give it over to Delphine to take it over there, and she will do the Q&As after and let you know how the proceedings will go. So to introduce Delphine, Delphine is the co-founder and chief investment officer of Perpetua Investment Manager. She has 22 years of direct investment experience, of which half was spent at Allen Gray, and where she held positions of portfolio manager and executive director. In 2012, Delphine have left Allen Gray to co-found Perpetua, where she has been managing clients' capital for the past 8 years. Delphine is a qualified chartered accountant and CFA charter holder, and she plays an active role in the investment financial services industry. She served also on the as an exco member and past deputy president in ABSIP in 2014 and 18. There's an incredible, she has incredible guests joining her today. The first in her panel, she will be joined by Miss Puti Mahangiale Dambengua. I'm just going to go through her profile quickly. Ms. Puti Mahangiale Dambengua joined Naspers as CEO South Africa in July 2019. She has joined Naspers and was co-founder and executive chairperson of Sigma Capital, and investment holding company formed in 2015. Before Sigma, she held a position as CEO at Shanduka Group, an investment holding company which she joined in 2004 and left in 2015. Prior to that, she has held She's been head of project finance in South African business unit at the Development Bank of South Africa. And early in her career, Puti has spent a few years in New York at Fieldstone, an international firm specializing in financing of infrastructure assets. She later transferred to the South African office and leaving as vice president. She's personally involved in several youth activities, including supporting students and mentoring young professionals. She's involved in a Dignity Day program, which is led by young global leaders in the World Economic Forum and focuses on reinforcing and creating value and dignity towards young people. Puti holds a BA in economics from the US and MBA as well from the UK. She sits on the board of the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation and was chair of the Kagiso Shanduka Trust and Audit Risk Committee in 2016. In 2017, she was appointed as Board of Trustees of the KST Trust, and Puti is also an independent director in Vodacom and Goldfields. She also serves as advisory of the Board of Business School in the Stellenbosch University. Welcome, Puti. Secondly, on the panel as well, Delphine will be joined by Derek Sieby. Derek is just going to go through Derek's intro quickly. Derek joined Stanlib Asset Management as Chief Executive Officer in May 2017. Prior to Stanlib, he was at Alexander Forbes, and previously Alexander Forbes was previously Investment Solutions, where he served as Managing Director from July 2009. He was a member of the executive committee of Alex Forbes and represented in the company's key industry forum. Prior to his tenure at Alex Forbes, he worked at Old Mutual, and he served as director on various financial, toll, and diversified investment holding sectors. He has a softer side. He is involved in non-profit entities, mainly focusing on education and social housing. This is part of his contribution towards the nation's nation building. Derek is a chartered accountant with degrees in finance and accounting, all bachelor's, honors, and master's level with the University of Cape Town. He is holding a program. He is a holder of the Program of Development Certificate from Harvard and a certificate of management from the London Business School. Welcome, Derek, who is also on the panel, and I'll hand over to Delphine to continue with the panel.
Thank you, Disebo, and welcome everybody. As Disebo has mentioned, it's really a fantastic honor to have such an illustrious panel join us today, and particularly because even if their CVs didn't bear this out already, I think you'll find in the insights that they'll provide. I'm going to jump straight into it in the interest of time, because I know we just have 40 minutes here to chat. And please, as Disebo mentioned, I do encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A, and I'll do my level best to try run through them. I just wanted you to get to know these panelists a little bit better. Apart from just what obviously their very impressive bios tell you, but just better in their day-to-day reality. So the best way perhaps is really just to ask them what it's been like to walk in their shoes in the last 5 or 6 months. And so really just to look back in terms of reflections, particularly because Puti and Derek and Priscilla come from such different industries. Puti, obviously, technology, media, etc. Derek, financial services, and Priscilla, obviously, energy. And I think Priscilla in her talk, so brilliantly explained how this has been a time of challenge, but yes, a time of opportunity. So if I could run through with each of you, starting with Puti, and we'll put you as the sandwich meat in the middle, Derek, and then Priscilla. Could you share with us, given that you represent these different industries, can you tell us 2020, what if, in your industry, how has this year, this coronavirus pandemic affected your experience this year? And particularly perhaps, even if you could just share one either significant experience, whether it was negative or positive or one of each, of this year, particularly in relation to your specific industry, so we could get to know the challenge this year better.
Thank you, Delphine. It's wonderful to be here with everyone. I think this year for us has been, it's really been unbelievable. I remember in January, we all got together as a team in Amsterdam for our meetings, and then we had to start looking at the fact that we'd have to start working from home. So we actually closed offices long before the government announced that, people needed to start looking at life very differently in terms of introducing work from home and all of that. So we started with that then back in, I think it was March or February. And from that period, we've continued. And so even though we are at level 2, as I was just chatting on the side with our former Deputy President, Dr. Dambengua, we spoke about, one of the things that we spoke about is the fact that whilst it's at level 2 now, in terms of government, setting it at level 2, we need to remember that government is looking at both the safety issues as well as economic issues. So, from our own perspectives, we need to set our levels higher. And she was talking about her level being at much higher than a level 2, more like level 5. So we as a company have taken on that view as well. And so even with people now starting to go back to the office and work in the office, we have, decided that we will still be at home until, at the end of the year or early next year. We're seeing how things go. But the reinfection is a high likelihood here in South Africa once again. So, yeah. But from a business perspective, it obviously hasn't affected us. Being a consumer internet business 100%, it's actually been very good for us. If you'll see our results, Take-A-Lot has done very well here in South Africa. But apart from that, it's been an issue of looking after the safety of all of our employees. Yeah.
Great, thanks for those insights. Derek, in your experience?
Thank you for the invitation, Delphine, and to Paulo and to the ABSIP women. I suppose my starting point would be what I learned was the relevance of asset management in that when there was a designation of what was considered to be essential, asset management was put forward as one of the industries that had to remain open. And so it was a reminder of the role that asset managers play, but more importantly, of the huge responsibility that we carry to keep aspects of the economy going and to make sure that people's money are actually invested and managed professionally, even in the worst of times. So that was the first issue, which was if we ever struggled about the purpose and the contribution that we make, I think it was validated during this time. At the same time, I would say that it's been tough, not so much for the people in asset management, in that generally clients continue to pay fees. The market did what it does. It recovered quite quickly. But generally, unlike the carnage that took place in other industries where salaries were cut, there was massive retrenchment, et cetera, I would say that the asset management industry has been rather fortunate in that it hasn't suffered the same fate as other parts of the industry. So our work really was so much around how do we continue to serve clients, making sure that our people are safe in order to be able to do that. So I would say that just my experience has been, it's been different strokes for different folks, unfortunately, and we feel quite privileged that in asset management, other than what the market has done, people still continue to invest. Yes, they do take money to meet needs, but we are there to do that. They give us money not forever, but that when there's a need, we'll be there to do that. And so I was quite heartened by the fact that we could play that role.
That's great, Derek. And I think both Puti and you highlighting that this crisis really has affected different industries quite differently, and technology and financial services arguably a lot more privileged in this way. Priscilla, the energy industry, I know the oil price has obviously been very volatile, but can you just talk about just what this year has been like? We've had fantastic wisdom for you in terms of your experience as a leader, but just in terms of the sector and how you've experienced something significant over this year.
Thank Delphine. I would really love to be in Puti and Derek's shoes. I think our industry is one of those which have been hit exceptionally hard, invariably as the supply and demand dynamics globally collapse, particularly with the decline or deterioration of demand. And specifically when you come back home in South Africa, we've seen almost a disruption of 80% to 90% demand during level 5 lockdown. That improved slightly. We're sitting at around 20% still destruction in our demand. In terms of jet fuel, which is one of the biggest lengths, we are still sitting with significant demand because there's still huge restriction on mobility. And as you would then expect, that had a significant impact in terms of earnings. Of course, oil prices dropped. There was oversupply globally and locally. We had to shut down a number, if not all, of our refineries, other than probably the Sasol one on the synfuels, to respond to that demand. And really, we got to the stage where, and this is few learnings for me, the first part was, how do we make sure that we prepared for the future? Times you go to business school. I remember when I was at Harvard doing my AMP, we talked about scenario planning. How do we bring them to life to make sure that we can actually anticipate these incidences and be able to respond. And I was very fortunate that my team and I were actually in the forefront of that. And we ran a number of scenarios. We looked at options, and of course, liquidity was quite critical at that particular stage, but equally so, we had to look at how do we preserve the sustainability of our customers, just to make sure that we help them to manage their credit risk and to really poise through this process, this very challenging period. So that was one learning. But for me, the fundamental shift was in terms of people impact. And at times you read about this until it hits home. And being an essential service all the time, the exposure to our frontline in terms of their travel to work when I'm comfortably working from home, is some of the things that really kept me awake at night, and knowing that at some stage they might actually be infected. And unfortunately, so they did get infected. And how do you deal with that? How do you support them? How do you continue to be visible? How do you call them individually during this period to recognize what they're going through and ensure that you've got the appropriate measures in place to support them to go through that healing process? But also we've seen in other areas, especially when the pandemic started to hit in Cape Town, some of our colleagues who were working from home virtually, who did not have the access and the luxuries of what we have, where you can isolate yourself, and their families were impacted or infected, and how do you support them? So it's been quite an emotional experience from a business, from a people perspective. But on the other hand, I have been extremely encouraged with how my team has responded. The innovation, adapting new solutions, how they've supported each other is remarkable. A lot of innovation and collaboration as I emerged out of this.
Thank you, Priscilla. What I'm very conscious of is that all of you, and I think all business leaders, wear so many different hats. And as you come here today, obviously offering, as you have already, Priscilla, pearls of wisdom and inspiration. I just thought it's important for the participants, in today's event to also understand your day-to-day challenges and really what that's been like for you, because they might just see all the kind of positive, inspiring stuff and not actually some of the challenges. So that was really just to give some context. So wanted to move on, directly to leadership, and particularly leadership in a time of crisis. Crises have, a very interesting way of surfacing a side of leadership that's not normally tested in normal operating environments. And I think this crisis, particularly because of the interplay of the health issues and the economic issues, etc. So I have a couple of questions that I'd like you all to address. And so firstly, in your observation, what attributes of leaders have you found inspiration in? Dr. Dambengua spoke about, the New Zealand Prime Minister and other, female leaders as an example, who have been exemplary in the way they've handled it. And I think, and Priscilla, you mentioned some of the attributes such as vulnerability, empathy, and Dr. Luka also spoke about a rounded approach and not being about point scoring. So if you could share with us some of these attributes of other in general that you found inspiration in this year to date, and then have you at all had to adapt your own leadership style, dealing with a very different environment? And then the last point about this is, could you share with us perhaps whether in any way that a diversity of leadership in your teams, whether it's a hierarchical team in a corporate or Puti, whether it's in subsidiaries or other businesses that are obviously part of the group, how has that diversity potentially contributed positively to how your business has fared and how you've adapted, responded, pivoted in this time? I'll start with you again, Puti.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think in terms of looking at leaders and the profile of leaders that I find to be inspirational, particularly at a time like this, I would look at somebody like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. I'd look at Angela Merkel in Germany, Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan, and many others, women who have led countries and done so well in terms of the management of COVID-19, and particularly when weighed against countries led by men such as the USA and many others in the world. So I find great inspiration from people such as that. I think certainly when one looks at just some of the issues around what one needs to focus on in times like this, it's really been a difficult time in terms of dealing with personal issues that people have had to face. At different times, people have had to come off work because they've had to face crises within their families. And so that psychoemotive element has been something that's been very important, to be able to be supportive to colleagues as they deal on the one hand with the work requirements, but also with family requirements. I've had to deal with colleagues who have, had to deal with either a partner or, another, close family member potentially passing away as a result of this disease. So it's been a difficult time, notwithstanding the fact that a company such as ours has continued to be very successful in a period such as this. From a personal perspective, it's been very difficult for many professionals. And so I think that ability to engage with your colleagues is something that is fundamentally important, and it's been very important for me. So one of the things that I typically would do in any case is I engage with all the heads of teams within the groups that the business that I'm responsible for here in South Africa. But apart from that, what I found is that over and above all the engagements with staff and all of that we do as a matter of course, you actually need to have these personal engagements with people, to say, yes, let's put like the financials aside. Tell me how you are doing. How's your family? And really have a proper, authentic discussion. So this has really been a time of really knowing, that humility, authenticity. It's been something that's been very important and valuable. And so, I think notwithstanding all the difficulties, it's certainly been a time of learning, certainly for me as a leader.
That's fantastic. Derek, your own experiences as a leader?
I think it's been probably the most testing time as a leader, because the issues that we're dealing with, the issues that had not been experienced before. So there was no textbook or template that one could borrow from. And so what you end up learning is actually saying to everybody, I actually don't know. This virus has been around for a very short space of time. I wasn't there in 1918 when there was the last flu pandemic. I lived through the GFC, but this is not the GFC. So I actually don't have the answer, but as a collective, as a team, let's figure out the answer, work together to find the answer. So I think we all learned to be a lot more vulnerable. I would say that probably bad leaders were found out and good leaders were validated. So if you look at how Angela Merkel and Jacinda in New Zealand have held, those people were good leaders anyway. And so the bad leaders are now just we're getting an opportunity to see their true colors. And so that's the nature of a crisis. The things that really matter and that we value tend to manifest themselves because of the choices that we make.
Thank you, Derek. There's an interesting question in the chat, which I thought I'll bring in now, with your indulgence, which spoke about asking, how do you manage staff? And I think, Puti, you mentioned having that personal connection and really trying to connect. And Derek, perhaps you could just give us a sense for how would you advise some of the young professionals and students who are trying to navigate the risk of burnout, because there has definitely been a blurring of lines, and perhaps something that we don't speak about a lot, in the financial services industry, but how they can take better care of their mental health. And I'm especially asking it to you as a male leader.
Yeah, I think the issue of burnout is something that's been prevalent in our industry in particular for a very long time. It so happens that now it just escalated to a point where I wouldn't say it's unmanageable, but it is bordering on being unmanageable. So it's a problem that's been there for many years, which we haven't dealt with. And so my first advice to them is you've got to create boundaries for yourself, and when does work start, when does work stop? That's the first thing. And you've got to be quite forceful about maintaining your boundaries. If you don't do that, there's always other people who want to climb over your boundary and wanting you to do things that encroach on your time. So that would be the first thing. The second issue is that you've got to obsess about self-care, which is that you've got to look after yourself. You are not bulletproof. Even those of us who think that we run marathons and we can survive anything, at some stage it catches up with us. And so you actually have to invest in your self-care, take time off, have some things that actually fill up your leaking bucket, figure out what causes your stress, and be able to manage the issues that cause your stress, etc., etc. You've got to understand that you've only got one life, and you want to live that life to the fullest. And when you are exhausted and you are stressed and you are tired, you're actually not going to enjoy life. The third issue for me is we all have leave. We've got to actually be obsessive about when we take leave. If you've been given 25 days by your company, there's a reason why they gave you 25 days or 20 days to take time off. So take it. Why are you not taking it? When you die or anything happens to you, I swear to God, the following day, there's going to be someone sitting at your desk. It's not going to take them too long. So none of us are indispensable. And so the moment we realize that we are indispensable, we actually have to realize that actually we can't be replaced. And if we can't be replaced, let's live our lives understanding that we are in transit to something else. And so that's my advice to young people, is that be forceful about your boundaries, look after yourself, and just take the breaks that you are offered.
Thanks,
Delphine.
Derek. Yes, Puti, please. Yes.
Sorry, if I can just say, Derek is a true, he really lives what he's saying. I mean, I remember when I met him in the 90s, and we would go to Cape Town to go and raise capital. And he looked exactly the way he looks now, but he was so strict. My goodness, you would walk into that office and you'd be dripping with sweat from fear. So, you can see he really lives what he says. And he's also a very, very hard worker as well.
Thanks for that. I was actually going to say, Derek, I wonder if this was advice you would give your 25-year-old self, but all evidences are that you did and you took it. Priscilla, I'd love to bring you in here on some of your perspectives and on both these topics, on advice to younger people, or anything in additional to what Derek has shared in terms of how they can balance, because I know part of your journey was really about hard work, etc., but then also knowing how to work smart as well. There are two things. Firstly, is there anything to add on kind of the leadership qualities that you respected? And again, I know you did touch on it. And then there was a question that came through, which there's another crisis that emerged in the world this year, and it's really been a crisis of racism and discrimination, which has always existed, but it really came to the fore. And one of the questions that I think came through in the Q&A while you were speaking was, how in your career history did you deal with conscious bias, so racism? But actually, I'd like to also ask you how you deal and have dealt with unconscious bias during your whole career history and your work journey.
Thank you. I think Puti has actually probably touched on a number of the inspirational leaders we've looked at. But the person that actually came to mind during the crisis, and Puti will remember her, is that as the executive board or non-executive board of Vodacom, we had an opportunity to go and visit O'Leary in Ireland a couple of months ago, just before the crisis, interestingly, in September or so in 2019. And she's such an inspirational leader for me, because one of the things that we were talking about at that particular stage was the issues of gender-based violence. But for me, the fundamental issue was when she spoke about that 1 in every 4 women in Ireland are actually subjected to gender-based violence, and the importance of bringing to life the UN ambitions into your organization and really putting them in front of your organization as you walk through your receptions. So that part, I then came back and I looked at it in my business and I said, wow, if this is true, it actually means that in South Africa is 30% or so, or in Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And it means that at least 1/3 of my team is actually subjected to abuse of some form. And it's also possible that 1 in every 3 of my colleagues is actually a perpetrator. So how do we then understand during this crisis, and now we're seeing the socioeconomic impact of the virus on families in our industry, we're all starting to look at operational efficiencies. We're going to be retrenching. We're looking at cutting jobs in terms of CAPEX, working capital. And these are activities which are employing people. So that's going to have impact on families. And how does this then impact on our people? How do they cope with the stresses that impact them because of the anxiety of whether tomorrow they'll have a job, or whether their colleagues and their family members are actually struggling with jobs? So one of the things we emphasize on, and I continue to emphasize on, is the ability to be open and transparent from day one about our anxieties, what's on our mind, and ensuring that we offer the EAP, we offered resilience training to our people. And I was also quite vulnerable. I addressed town halls. I spoke to everyone in the organization about my own vulnerabilities. I've got parents who are aging and daughters who are already working. Every time they leave the house, I'm anxious. So how do we then openly talk about this? Because it's only when people can see the humanity in you that they can then realize that this is possible. Then they can go and think about their boundaries. They can go and take a break when they're working. But also, it also calls for us to be mindful of when do we set up meetings? And how do we give people back time? I was very clear that I don't start at 9 o'clock. If you're really going to ask me for a meeting at 9 o'clock, because I work excessive hours in my life, you better have a good reason why I have to be there at 9 o'clock. I prefer to be downstairs with my family, my dad who's staying with us, and have breakfast with them. Then I can start at 9 o'clock and finish as late as it is. But these are boundaries that you have to be very, very clear on. But leaders need to lead by example. And when do you send people emails, which is something I struggle with? And they respond, whether you like it or not. At times I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm surprised when I send an email, someone responds to it. So I think this is the time of really conscious living, being alert, understanding our tone, understanding how our impact is on others, but also being able to manage our own stresses. When we're dealing with the demands of our work, how do we respond? How do we set expectations? How do we rally the team around us? How do we become vulnerable to say, I don't know, help me? How do you leverage on your team's expertise and capabilities? And that has really fed us very well, because we could then trust others to do other things, because we had to divide and conquer. You just could not do anything.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to start working for all of you. So that's going to be a challenge at the end of this summit. Just wanted to touch just quickly, Priscilla, the question of unconscious bias or conscious bias in your experience. Was that something that you experienced in the workplace?
I mean, I'll be lying to you if I said I haven't. It's as prevalent as a young Black professional coming through the ranks, early ages of your career, but also when you work in a global space. It's just, and these challenges with this, I mean, I can share so many stories, is that I prefer conscious bias, because their body language says it all, and you can understand most of the time even their reactions. It's very difficult when it's subtle, and people say it's unconscious, and I don't think it's unconscious. I think we all know what our biases are, and we know, if you are reflective as a human being, that I could have done things better. We just don't have the courage to go back and apologize or ask how people are feeling. So I've been subjected to all of that. So 3 things for me that has worked hard. In the beginning, it puts so much pressure on me, because you then start to doubt your confidence. You start to work extremely hard. My kids paid hugely for that. In terms of, as Pumzile was saying earlier on, you work 5 times as hard, then you don't see your family. And you can never, ever redeem that time. So how do you then make sure that you're really confident in who you are? It doesn't matter what people do, what they say, just ensure that you build that confidence. That's very important. The courage to challenge and to go and have the difficult conversations. Interestingly, in most of the experiences I've had, other than for 1 or 2, most people have their biases because of their own fears. And the minute you make yourself vulnerable, that this is how you make me feel. And I have addressed those heads on. Or this is how I think the individual that just walked out of the room was made to feel. And have that open and dialogue conversation. It has helped me. But also the beauty of mentorship. I have learned from a lot of leaders who have come before me, so that I don't repeat the same mistake. Because there are times when I became arrogant, and that line was blurred in terms of who I am, in terms of my values. You need to have mentors. You need to share your stories. Take your dilemmas and unpeel them like an onion. These are my challenges at work. Help me work through this. And throughout my journey, starting when I was at ESCOM, Really now it's almost over 20 years. Wendy Lucas Ball has been there for me. She's seen me cry, she's challenged me, she's walked a path with me. And then my friends, we've shared the experiences. So one of the things I challenge the youth is that when you're at the coffee, and I said that to my team in the businesses, what do you talk about? Do you go and talk about your shoes, handbags, the weather, or that boss that I don't like? Or do you share your learnings? Do you support one another? The peer assist is very powerful.
Such powerful advice and really tangible, I think, kind of action-oriented advice, which many young women especially know. And I would completely concur that in my own journey, perhaps especially as women, we are so focused on having to keep that armor up and keeping that kind of resilient exterior, which to a fault at points in time, when actually some of the strength comes from having that vulnerability and then creating those courageous conversations in order to overcome some of those barriers. So very powerful. Thank you, Priscilla. I'd like to change tack a little, Puti, and bring you in here. And a lot of the conversations, and I think we had it earlier, earlier part of the event, we spoke about reskilling, repurposing your skills, particularly as we move to an accelerated digital age. And I think in your professional experience, you've had this, phenomenal opportunity when at Chanduka, Sigma, and even now, especially now at Naspers with this kind of, big platform, to have worked with amazing entrepreneurs and witnessed kind of who was able to really capitalize on changing trends and successes and failures. Can you share with us perhaps some challenges and opportunities that you see emerging, perhaps for women entrepreneurs, especially, and how they might, as women entrepreneurs, for whatever reasons, be better or worse positioned in a post-COVID world, and how they, and perhaps some actionable advice, perhaps, or tools in this reskilling kind of mindset?
So, Delphine, I think, reskilling is obviously, it's something that's critical for all of us. And it's something that we need to all be open to in the different careers. And I've had to face that continuously. Coming into this area of telematics, technology, and the digital space has been a complete change. I mean, even the way that you look at financials, everything is just, it's all different. And, but it's all about us being open to that. So it's something that we have focused a lot on. In South Africa, what we've done in the work that the nonprofit work that is done in the group is focused on providing digital skills to young people in South Africa, because the majority, we have a significant number of young people who are unemployed. So we bring them in and make sure that they are digitally skilled and can be employable. And it's been interesting to see how much of a requirement there is for these digital skills, because as soon as we've trained off these young people, we have a company that's looking, for the skills and they take them off. So it's something that is so critical for us to all be looking at, apart from the area that we are in, which is the digital side. But quite frankly, I don't see how any of us can be looking at anything different, because when I look at some of the other boards that I sit on, obviously Vodacom is very focused on digital use. But if I look at Goldfields and other companies, they are all focused on how they can migrate their businesses to becoming a lot more digital in order to be able to interface with their customers a lot more effectively. Because that is how you are able to engage with all your companies. If you look at insurance businesses or a number of different sectors, all of them have had to find ways to become a lot more digital in order to engage much more effectively with their customers. So it's something that is a key, I think, for all of us as professionals to be open to. You don't just say, this is who I am, I've studied in this area, and so that's all I'm going to do. You have to keep on learning. I think Priscilla mentioned, I can't remember which degree you said you had done, and I was kind of surprised, like, wow. I thought you're a chartered accountant and that was it. And then, but it's brilliant, because it shows that yearning and that, that focus on continuous learning, which is something that's just so important for all of us.
Thanks very much. there's a question that's come through on the chat, Puti, while I have you online. And it's interesting because while those are some of kind of the, I'd say, harder skills you mentioned, in terms of that reskilling and repurposing, particularly for women, there's obviously a whole, trove of soft skills. And one of the elements that I think we all have probably experienced is that women tend to have this constant need to seek permission for the kinds of things that they want to do or get done in a workplace. It's quite staggering, actually. And so there's a question from Chanel, and basically I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. She asks, in your own journey as a leader, when you interacted with other men, and you were largely, I would assume, in the minority as a woman of color, were there any soft skills or other areas that you had to kind of adapt so that you could relate to the men better, or did you just hope that they would adapt? How did you feel you needed to perhaps change the way you were behaving, or anything for that matter?
I think one of the first things that I had to learn, Delphine, was whether I was there to fight or to learn. Because if I had decided to go with my emotive, approach to issues that were facing me, particularly as a younger professional, I could have just been a continuous fighter and therefore just gone out and never been able to grow. But I think when you are focused on your career for the long term, as you will know, Delphine, yourself, you have to be able to choose between what is worth fighting for and what is not, because there are certain things that you're never going to teach anyone. And quite frankly, it's not worthwhile of your own time, so you have to decide, is this a lesson I need to teach or not, and where it is something that is worthwhile teaching, that's where you really want to make sure that you are doing that job very well. And it has to be worthwhile of that. But apart from that, I've been focused very much on just growing in my industries and really being able to recoup as much as I can. So apart from the work of the studying and all of that reading that we all are continuously doing, it is also about engaging with people continuously, and people that might be influential at that moment, or people that are still coming up, because things are changing all the time continuously. And to the extent that you have been able to work on your relationships, it really helps a lot. It makes things a lot easier in terms of being able to access certain opportunities from time to time. So it's both, the hard skills and the soft skills as well, managing both. And I was somebody who was always very shy. And so these were all newly learned skills. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that sharing. I think it will definitely resonate with many. So Derek, to you, I think, and I would assume, with ABSIP being a financial services body, quite a few of the listeners today are going to be professionals in the financial services world. And some of you might not know, but I was actually a 24-year-old young analyst, freshly qualified CA, and I walked into the doors of all mutual asset managers, and here was Derek on the other side, who I was incredibly intimidated by. But the interesting thing is, Derek, is that firstly, I think you would be happy to know that in 2020, there are loads more, women professionals, and we have these conversations, and we're also really proud that you would participate in them. But in some ways, not that much has changed compared to 1998, particularly in the investment world, particularly when you look at the top of the investment world, whether it's people who run money, it's not a lot of women, and not a lot of people of color either. So I guess, it's been very male dominated. It is very male dominated. And Priscilla used this fantastic analogy of this leaking pipeline, where you have these young, phenomenal women that come in, but somehow, for some reason, whether it's the environment that's perhaps experienced as oppressive, whether it's the woman who herself in her personal development doesn't have enough confidence, leaves, and then it's the inflexibility potentially of the environment that doesn't embrace the woman in her identities as she goes from 24 to 35 and becomes, a wife and a mom, etc. So in what ways, Derek, can you assure young women on this call today that perhaps the way the traditional workplace works in financial services, and particularly in investing, you're willing to look differently at it as leaders to improve the odds of less leakage from this high quality pipeline, so that women don't opt out, they don't jump off the train. And lastly, I guess Dr. Dambengua spoke about, we want women in the powerful roles. That's where we want them. So financial services companies are fantastic at telling us how many, they're 72% women, but actually I always ask what percentage of a REM bill goes to women? And so guide the young women on this call. I know it's lots of questions, but you were going to get the big one. So this one's for you.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is that we all have to acknowledge that the issues that women face are different to the ones that men deal with. And as a result, men need to make the effort to make it easier for women to be able to balance and to deal with their key issues as opposed to what men deal with. So that's the first thing. So there has to be an acknowledgement that they are different. The second issue is that I would say that where men and women, in my experience, have been different is that women have been very good in getting mentors, but very poor in getting sponsors. And there's a big difference between the two, because the sponsors are the people who talk about you when you are not in the room. Whereas the mentors are the people who talk to you. And so I would say one of the things that we need to be looking at is how do we create some form of sponsorship for women. I see a lot of mentorship groups for people. I'm not saying that mentorship doesn't work. I'm just saying I think with mentorship, you should add sponsorship to it. The two have to coexist. And if you look at the research that's been done, it shows that actually if you take a group of men with sponsors and those who don't have sponsors, the ones who've got sponsors tend to make better progress than the ones who don't have sponsors. And so there is something to be done for that. So I would say we've got to look at how do we have some form of sponsorship for women. I'm not talking about sponsorship to go do an MBA. I'm talking about sponsorship about when there's a discussion around who's going to move from being an analyst to being a portfolio manager. And when the debate takes place, who is actually advocating for the women and for the people who are not actually in the room. So that's the second point I would raise. The third point I would raise is that the work dynamic, there is a lot of femininity that's required, but at times women choose to leave that at the door and decide that they want to be like men. And I would say that we've got to try and balance the two. For those of us who started in the industry where there was a few Black people, we had to balance the view that we were Black, we brought something to the organization, and we didn't leave all of that at the door because we believe that it actually added to the diversity, et cetera, of the companies that we're working for. And so I don't think at times we are. At times I feel that some of the women are too quick to want to conform rather than actually saying, well, actually there is a different way of how we should be behaving, and these are the behaviors that they would bring into that male-dominated world. The third is, the final issue is that as women get the responsibility, they have an opportunity to change and to influence the change that they want to see. If, for instance, you're a woman and you know you want to take your kids to school, you don't want to have meetings at 9, well, start modeling that. Just say to your bosses or whatever, guys and girls, I think I can't make meetings before 9 because of these reasons. Let's try and structure around that. Or I can't have meetings after 4 because I've got other responsibilities. So that influence and those opportunities that are there, I think at times they go not taken care of and not being utilized, when in fact it's a very good opening. The difference between men and women is that men are very good in seeing an opportunity and small open window and taking it. I think women at times want the door to be wide open and then feel that, okay, the door is open and therefore that we're now welcome. At times you don't really have to be made to feel that you are welcome. You've got to just see it as, here's an opportunity, I've got a role, I'm sitting in a board, etc. Let me drive the change that I want to be. The final issue is really building allies. I think there is the issue of women and some of the issues that women are fighting for. Some of them are issues that men actually desire to have. At times we're just not honest enough to admit it. We want to go and watch our kids play soccer. We want to help them with their maths in the evening, with their homework, because that's what good dads do. But unfortunately, what has happened is that it's become a woman's only issue. And therefore, the women are fighting this thing on their own, instead of actually saying, guys, these are issues that we should all be concerned about. And therefore, we as women are happy to be their agents, but the man must be standing there next to the women actually fighting for them. And I think the voice of women and at times the timidity that they bring lets that particular initiative down. So, I mean, if you ask me personally, what do I want to be? I think if I just look at the world around us, to some degree, to a large degree, in some sectors, men have just stuffed up completely. I mean, you look at politics, the world is a mess. Why? Because you've got men who are over 70, 80, wanting to hold on to power, and you've got young women in different nations who are showing how it could be done. I bet you probably the same thing in corporates. And so I'd like to be seen as more as a feminist male, more than anything else.
We'll have you as that. So thank you. And we look forward to seeing the changes in the financial services industry. I think there are 3 points especially that you raised. I mean, it's really valuable. And for those of you that didn't get to write all the notes down for all of the speakers, go back and listen, on YouTube. But there were 3 elements. The first about the sponsor versus the mentor. There's a very well-known, very successful African-American woman, Carla Harris, who works for Morgan Stanley. And she speaks about the mentor is the person you tell the good, the bad, and the ugly to, and the sponsor is the person you tell the good to. And there's a difference, because the sponsor is the one that speaks for you, when it's for promotion. The second is that you mentioned about women need to learn to be more unapologetic. We tend to apologize continuously about, I can't make the meeting, I'm so sorry. But actually, as Priscilla said, just set the boundaries. And I think the last point is that we wait for the perfect opportunity. But perfection is not available. It will never be available. You actually just have to grab it. I am conscious of time, but we've been granted 5 or 6 more minutes. So we are going to close with one question for each of you, the same question. And I'm actually going to move to you, Priscilla. I think, and I wanted to end on a note that was kind of much more outward looking, because really this is about, exactly as you mentioned, Priscilla, this is about our purpose to society, our servant leadership, no matter who we are and where we are in our career journey. And I think perhaps the biggest tragedy that we've seen this year has been, and it's ironic because, stock markets go higher and higher and higher, and yet the reality for the majority, the 99.9%, has gotten worse. And so the greatest tragedies, I think, has been this exacerbation of inequality, and with its opportunity, wealth, income, etc. Can you leave with us some tangible things that you believe that the people on this call, whether we are active citizens, whether we are leaders, whether we are, people that can influence those in government, in our households, etc., that can do to contribute to closing the gap, to arresting the gap? I mean, how do we think about it? Puti, I know you mentioned education and educational initiatives, but Dr. Shlambo-Nuka said, how do we build things better, whether at a micro level or at a macro level, and how do we participate in that conversation as ABSIP and as individuals, and how do we think perhaps creatively, no matter our position or influence? Priscilla, I'm going to leave it to you for that question, and then I'm coming to the others as well.
Thank you. I'll talk about 3 points. I think the first one quickly would just be around recognizing, especially all of you on the panel here, is that you're operating in a very powerful industry. And one of the biggest challenges that women are facing is ability to raise funding. So, for example, I facilitate and sponsor a Women in Energy. I have think tanks, and we have sessions on an annual basis. And when you start listening to women entrepreneurs, it's not an issue direct to challenge you about that they don't see the opportunities. It's the doors that are closed on them. So how much time do we invest in helping people to fish for themselves rather than to be donating? Because at times you take your salary, you give it to an organization, which I don't say we should not, but how do we use our expertise to enable people to fish? How do we go out and ensure that we can encourage entrepreneurship? Local participation in the labor market is very important, and you play a critical role in terms of this. So that's the first point. I think the second point is really recognizing that things are going to get hard economically and in the next couple of months. And yet, on the other hand, as well, as Phumzile mentioned, the digitalization is going to change and disrupt our lives. So how do we make sure that that education that Puti mentioned, some of us sits in different universities, some of the Wits business
have we lost Priscilla?
Yeah, it seems.
Okay. In the interest of time, Derek, I want to end with a woman's voice. So I'm going to ask you to perhaps come in first before Puti comes in. And hopefully we might get Priscilla back. But Derek, just some of your thoughts for the impact initiatives that us as individuals could have.
Yeah, I think the first thing for me is really how do we help our state to be able to deliver to its people. So I'm very much in the camp of actually saying there is a very big budget that we pay through our taxes, which should go a long way in terms of dealing with inequality and improving the livelihood of the people, but the state is just not capable of delivering. And so how do we bring our skills as professionals in finance, in engineering or whatever, to help the state to be able to reach where it's not able to reach? That would be my first point, which is we've got to really think about how we engage government to make sure that the 1.2 trillion rand budget that they have actually achieved the objectives that it's set to do. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that where people fall off the net, I think in South Africa in the last 5 months, we realized that the social security system in this country is broken. We've got no safety net whatsoever to cater for people who are either unemployed or who are disabled, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think if there's one thing we can do as professionals is one, let's not complain when we hear that there are 18 million people on social grants. That is one of the biggest opportunities we have to deal with inequality. Let's work in terms of being supportive in how we enable the state to be a lot more efficient in how it deals with that. But let's not get into the fight about we don't support a basic income grant. Because that is what is required for those who are going to get left behind. And unfortunately, as Thomas Piketty demonstrated in his work on inequality, is that those who have got financial assets, who earn a salary, pull away faster and further than those who are unemployed and at the lower end of it. And so if we do not support some of these social reform issues on social security, we are going to have the country a worse situation than what we have at the moment.
Thanks. Thank you, Derek. I think that that's very powerful, and particularly to all those listening, and it's interesting, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago while His Excellency, our President Ramaphosa was Deputy President, I think it was about 4 years ago, and he spoke at an ABSIP event, and he spoke about the fact that the Brains Trust sits in the private sector in terms of, you know, skills, etc., and the importance of us as financial sector professionals and just professionals leaning in and offering that, because I think we often find we don't have an ability to transmit an impact or influence. But I think I really take on board and the challenge that you offer. We have Priscilla back. So Priscilla, perhaps you could just close on your comments, and then we could move to Puti for her views on this.
No, that's fine. I think Derek also really addressed one of the things that I'm very passionate about, and my team knows that very well, is our role in helping government to define the right policies, procedures, but also how we play in terms of committing our own time. We're very good at sitting from the back and challenging government and the lack of capability, because I do believe there's such a huge potential for the country. It's really the role we play in how we shape it and ensure that we can be instrumental in ensuring that we can unleash the value for this country. So Derek touched it very well as well. And thank you so much for everyone. And I've learned a lot as well being here today.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. And I think for those on the call who wonder, well, how do I influence? Perhaps ABSIP is your mechanism and your transmission platform. So I also encourage you to even work through ABSIP, who definitely has the ear, if you're wondering, how do I make this difference? So Puti, to end with you, can you share some of your perhaps suggestions and advice for how people could really get more involved to solving and reconstructing the economy?
Delphine, I think it really starts with all of us, and it starts actually in our families, with the very children that we are bringing up. Many of the stats that we look at when we look at issues that are affecting our economy, and one looks at issues such as the GBV stats, these are things that are coming from our own families, through the young people that are being brought up in our families. And, it's not just the family that you are biologically related to, but it's also the many young people out there, that you engage with. And so the extent to which we can have an impact on the lives of young people is something that is critical for this economy, for us to be able to move forward. Because when you look at the fact that the majority of our population is a young population, this is something that we need to be really be fixated on. When I look back and I see the opportunities that I have had, it's opportunities that have come as a result of having come from a family that cared for me. And so I was able to be focused on my education and et cetera, and to become one of recipients in 2003 of the ABSIP award for project finance. But these are things that come from support. And so I think it is so important that we focus on the young people in our nation. We really need to look at that and see how best we can make sure that they are well equipped in order to deal with all of the social issues that are affecting them today.
Thank you so much, Puti, and thank you for reminding us, because I think that we always think that the kind of impact we need to have is so far removed from our circle of influence, when it's actually right here and immediate. I'm sure all of you would agree that we could have another 45 minutes or an hour, if not two, because there's so much that has come through and there's so many questions that have come through that I just was impossible to get through. But I really wanted to thank the panelists today for your incredible openness and your authenticity and the wisdom and just a collective kind of accumulated knowledge and personal experience that you've brought. It's been a pleasure to have this opportunity to chat with you, and perhaps there'll be future opportunities. I'm going to hand back now to Disebo, who as MC for the day. Thank you, Disebo.
Thank you so much, Delphine, and thank you to the panelists today. Thank you so much for your time and your precious insights. I was one that was just jotting notes, so I will also go back to the recording and also take in some beneficial knowledge of wisdom, starting from our keynote speakers and all the way to our panelists. I would just like to hand over just to give us a short thank you, a vote of thanks, and conclude to our Deputy Treasury General, Ms. Prudence Makololo, and she will be doing that. Before I do that, there's a quote from the book Indomitable Spirit, and it is by the former President of India, Mr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He says in that book, when learning is purposeful, creativity blossoms. When creativity blossoms, thinking emanates. When thinking emanates, knowledge is fully lit. And when knowledge is fully lit, economies flourish. So I think that's a conclusion of today's discussions in terms of driving purpose and the knowledge that we acquired today. Over to you, Prudence.
Thanks, Disebo. I mean, for me, Women's Day is a celebration and an acknowledgement of the many roles that women play. We are wives, we are mothers, daughters, sisters, friends, leaders, colleagues, and so much more. And I mean, this month is an opportunity to both acknowledge and celebrate what we contribute to the world. And I think we've certainly achieved that today. And I want to personally thank everyone who has joined us for the celebration of women. And today was a perfect way to end a month where, as ABSIP, has been celebrating the success of strong, powerful women. And I hope that you've been as inspired as I have by these interactions. To our speakers today, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your personal reflections on the shifting paradigm and how we can continue to grow and empower the women leaders that South Africa desperately needs. Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, Priscilla Mabalani, Puti Mahangiale Dambengua, thank you for being women that we can emulate and for creating a path for young, aspiring women to follow. Thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do to lift as you climb and to empower other women in your spheres of influence. Delphine Govender, our panel facilitator, I think you're one of the most brightest shining stars, lighting the way for women in investment management, and we continue to value your unfailing support to ABSIP. Last but not least, Derek and Sieby, Thank you for sharing the male perspective with us. We need more men like you to act as mentors and sponsors and supporters of women in general in the financial services sector. Thank you to our MC, Disebo, for keeping the house in order. And once again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. Please do continue to watch the space for even more inspiring women in our upcoming events. Thank you all and have a lovely afternoon further.
Thank you all. Bye.